I'd like to begin by emphasizing that Russia considers itself at war with the United States and European nations, specifically the UK, since the US and UK have launched their missiles into the territory of Russia. Um, this was a statement made by President Putin on September 12th when Keir Starmer came to the White House when they were set to initiate this attack, but was delayed until, well, after Trump was elected.
Речь идет не о том, чтобы разрешать украинскому режиму наносить удары по России этим оружием или не разрешать. Речь идет о том, чтобы принять решение о том, что страны НАТО напрямую участвуют в военном конфликте или нет. Если это решение будет принято, это будет означать не что иное, как прямое участие стран НАТО, Соединенных Штатов, европейских стран в войне на Украине. Это их прямое участие. И это уже, конечно, существенным образом меняет саму суть, саму природу конфликта. Это будет означать, что страны НАТО, США, европейские страны воюют с Россией.
So they went ahead and attacked Russia anyway. And the U.S. hides behind the fig leaf that they're allowing Ukraine to make these decisions. But as President Putin pointed out, the decisions are made in Washington. The targeting decisions, the programming is all being done by the United States technicians. And the result was that the other day, Russia used its new intermediate range ballistic missile to strike Ukraine. And this is a MIRV warhead, which means it can carry multiple warheads. There looked like there were 6 different separate groups of weapons. So, and some people say that there were 36 total projectiles that hit. I don't know. I believe Larry Johnson suggested it could have been 6 missiles. But at any rate, these are nuclear capable. And Russia was making the point. So what else has happened? Well, a couple of days ago, it was on Judge Napolitano's broadcast, Colonel McGregor stated that Russia has placed its nuclear forces on full alert.
Well, I have at least 2 sources right now telling me that Russian nuclear rocket forces are on full alert. They are at the highest level of readiness they have ever achieved, which means that they are literally a short message away from launching nuclear warheads on missiles against anyone that threatens them, whether it's the United States or its surrogates in Eastern Europe. So that much has happened, which suggests to me that the Russians have taken this very seriously.
I would think that the United States would make a corresponding increase in its DEFCON status if they detect that Russia has done that. So it's very likely that both the United States and Russia have moved to very close to nuclear warfighting status with their DEFCON. Russia has begun production of mobile nuclear shelters and distributing these. These are protected citizens from various threats, particularly radiation. They can be equipped with air filters. Russia recently announced, well, the spokesperson for the foreign ministry announced that the Aegis Ashore missile base in Poland is now a priority target. The U.S. also has a similar base in Romania. The Polish base is 741 miles away from Moscow. That's about the distance of Quebec City from Washington, D.C. The Romanian base is 811 miles. That's like Thunder Bay over on the northern edge of Lake Superior for Washington. I suspect the United States wouldn't appreciate that if they had missile bases placed in those locations. These systems use a Mk-41 vertical launch system, and it can be used to launch nuclear-armed Tomahawk cruise missiles. This is a selection of missiles that can be used. You can see in the center anti-air warfare, the SM-6 missile, which may eventually be replaced with a hypersonic weapon that can hit Moscow in 4 to 5 minutes. I suppose it could be fitted with a nuclear warhead. But you can see over here, the Tomahawk missile is one of the weapons that's loaded into the Mark 41. This is an image of the missile being loaded into it on the Aegis Ashores. The Aegis systems are used on naval vessels, so that's why they call it ashore. Well, Russia can't verify what's in those containers. You can see over to the right that the missile goes in the container, and that's the structure. So you can understand why Russia would consider this to be a priority target, because the Tomahawk missile can hit Moscow in about an hour or so, and the hypersonic weapons that soon to follow will be in a matter of minutes. I think that if they're foolish enough to attack the Kursk nuclear power plant, they could start a nuclear war. Russia would retaliate with a nuclear strike. The nuclear power plant is within range of all the missiles, the ATACMS and Storm Shadow Scout missiles, and it has two older nuclear reactors that are not protected by concrete containment. A concerted attack with a swarm of missiles could be, even though the Russians have been shooting down the ATACMS and Storm Shadows, it doesn't mean that if they get hit with a swarm of them, they'll get every single one. Each of these reactors in its spent fuel pools contains at least 10 times more long-lived radiation than was released by the 1986 Chernobyl disaster. You can see this is a comparison. The RBMK Chernobyl type reactors at Kursk, these are the two there. But a modern reactor has a cylindrical concrete dome. It's about 3 feet thick and lined with steel. So they're much more difficult to hit. This is an interior view of the Chernobyl 2 reactor and the Kursk reactor. On the left is Chernobyl. That in the back there's is the top of the reactors. That's the top of the reactor, and this one adjacent to that is the spent fuel pool. So they're right next to each other in a building that's not protected. This is a image that the French nuclear IRSN organization created to show the spread of cesium-137 after the Chernobyl reactor blew up in 1986. These reactors have a graphite core which will burn. So the line at the bottom down there shows as a progression over a 3-week period as the radiation spread throughout Europe, and I mean it went everywhere. We got some in North America too, but the areas around Chernobyl and Belarus were really hard hit. This is a map and I made in 1996 by the CIA. The darkest red areas are the exclusion zones. They're too radioactive for people to live in. There's still about 1,100 square mile there. Cesium-137 has a 30-year half-life, so to get 5 half-lives, you will get down to about 3%. 10 half-lives, 1%, but you're talking about 200 to 300 years before you can really live in an area like that. So that shows you what the implications of hitting these reactors. Well, of course, the U.S. and Russia can each launch 800 to 1,000 strategic nuclear warheads at each other in a matter of minutes. Another thing they can do, Russia's developed, this slide was made by Dr. Postal. They have the Poseidon robot unmanned submarine. It's a drone. It's very large. You can see the image of the man standing above it. And Dr. Postal showed that it can fit a 100 megaton warhead in the tip of this. These things can go faster than our torpedoes. They have unlimited range. They can loiter. This is a picture of the Belgorod sub that carries them. You can see the 6 holes in the front where they would be launched. There are 2 of these now that are deployed. This is an image of a 100 megaton, well, this is a 50 megaton bomb that was detonated in 1961 by the Russians. I believe this photograph was taken at least 75 or 100 miles away from the detonation. It was detonated in a remote area where there weren't a lot of forests or anything, but had it been detonated in an area where it was heavily forested or urban, it would set enormous fires. Dr. Postal created an image of what it would happen if the Belgorod used 6 of these torpedoes, these drone submarines, to hit the East Coast. And the largest yellow circular area depicts a fire zone. Would be 17,000 square kilometers or 6,500 square miles for each one of these detonations would be set on fire. This is a video I created some time ago that shows what happens. I shortened it a little bit, but it shows what happens when Russians respond with an attack on NATO forces, and it goes from there. These are counterforce strikes where the U.S. responds and hitting targets in Russia to take out its nuclear forces, but it's not going to arrive in time to do that, and a full-scale nuclear war results. And there'll be more than 4,000 nuclear detonations that incinerate all the major cities in the US, Europe. China would probably be involved too, but the massive nuclear firestorms from these would literally cover hundreds of thousands of square miles. Everything that's flammable in the fire zone would burn. There would be no survivors. The air temperatures get to above the boiling point of water. So if you live in a city, that would be what you would be looking at. The scientific studies predict that 150 to 180 million tons of smoke and soot would rise into the stratosphere. And in a matter of 10 days to 2 weeks, the high winds in the stratosphere would spread it around the world. It would cause a global stratospheric smoke layer to form. And this smoke would block about 70% of the sunlight in the northern hemisphere and 35% in the southern. It would also destroy the protective ozone layer. That wouldn't be noticed immediately, but it would after the smoke begins to dissipate. That would be actually about 10 years before it really would go away. So 70% of the sunlight means that it's going to be at noon on a day in June, say in the northern hemisphere, it would be like having a full moon out at midnight. That's how much sunlight you would get. Southern hemisphere would be a little bit less than that, but it would still cause temperatures to be too cold for many years to grow crops. And, you know, the cold weather would cause the death of most humans and land animals. Initially, the daily temperatures would fall below freezing every day for up to 3 years in central North America and central Eurasia. So that's what we're looking at with a nuclear war. Kennedy warned us about this, and this is a little, you know, we're still at a point where we can stop this.
Never have the nations of the world had so much to lose or so much to gain. Together we shall save our planet, or together we shall perish in its flames. Save it we can, and save it we must. And then shall we earn the eternal thanks of mankind, and as peacemakers, the eternal blessing of God.
Well, Trump may be no Kennedy, but I agree with Scott Ritter that he needs to act, contact the Russians, do everything he can to stop this. I would also suggest that Biden needs to be impeached. And Francis Boyle has written up articles of impeachment that are available. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Starr, for that. And I actually would like to ask, especially given that you're a former UN weapons inspector, Scott Ritter, if you have a response to Professor Steve Starr. Oh, I think you're muted there, my friend.
There we go. Okay.
There we go.
Said I want to applaud him for laying out the this case succinctly, accurately, dispassionately, almost too dispassionately. It's not a criticism. It's a reflection of his professionalism, except that people should be changing their underwear in fear after listening to what he said. And yet I think his soothing voice has calmed us into believing that maybe this was just another, academic presentation. It wasn't. He was laying out the imminent demise of mankind. And I want to reinforce that point. The Russian weapon that was used, I'm getting ready to publish a paper on this today, if we make it, that breaks down what I think it is. There's not much literature out there, but if you know the history of Russian ballistic missile design and such, this was a weapon that it's related to a weapon that the Russians were developing, the Soviets were developing back in the early 1980s called the Skorost. And the Skorost missile, 15Ja-66, was quickly developed by then Minister of Defense Ustinov to respond to the planned deployment of Pershing II missiles by the United States into Germany. The Russians were very afraid of the Pershing II because once you launched the Pershing II, 7 minutes later, it hit Moscow. And the Russians were not happy about that. So they built this missile, the Skorost, which was an amalgam of components drawn from the SS-20 Pioneer, the Mod 3 version of the Pioneer, the SS-25, which was still under development, the SS-27, which was top secret under development. Nobody even knew it existed. And they put it all together in a two-stage missile topped with conventional warheads, and they were going to flood Czechoslovakia and East Germany with these systems and monitor on a continuous basis the Pershing II bases. And the moment the Pershing II went to the field in a in a manner that looks, suspicious, they would take it out preemptively. That was what the Skorost was all about, to preemptively take out emerging threats. The system was nearing production when the INF, fact is, it was ready to go into production in March of 1987. But in December, Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev signed the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, so the Skorost went the way of history. And in doing so, the Skorost, people need to understand, again, I keep telling people, there was a time when we talked to the Soviets. There's a time when we talked to the Russians. I spent a lot of time at the Russian embassy in the last 2 years attending functions and talking to Anatoly Antonov, the ambassador, and talking to Major General Bobkin, the defense attaché, and talking to his officers and having very detailed conversations. I just, remind, Bobkin was a former, when we started talking, he's a strategic rocket forces guy who was in an SS-25 unit in Novosibirsk when I inspected it in 1990. What a small world we live in. And he was sent to the United States to help facilitate arms control talks, how to prevent the very crisis that we're in. Anatoly Antonov is an expert on the United States. He speaks English fluently. And he was, of course, the man who negotiated the New START Treaty with Rose Guttmuller. He was ready to engage again on extending the New START to prevent exactly what's happening. Anatoly Antonov was here for 7 years, and the U.S. didn't talk to him. Bobkin arrived, and the first thing that happened is that the Ukrainians got him blackballed in the defense attaché circuit, so nobody talked to him. Had they talked to him, as I did, they would have gotten an insight into how the strategic rocket forces felt about the INF Treaty, about the START Treaty, about disarmament, about what Gorbachev did to them, and how they feel that impacted their national security. And you would understand that they were very bitter about this entire experience. They felt that they had been weakened by it and that they were ready to regain the former glory of the Soviet strategic rocket forces. If you know anything, again, if you've studied Russian military history, Soviet military history, you understand that the present day is very much influenced by the past. So when the United States withdraws from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty in 2019 under President Reagan, Putin said, we view this treaty as being very important to prevent war. And so we will not develop new intermediate range systems, and we'll act as if the treaty is in force so long as you don't deploy intermediate systems into Europe. Of course, earlier this year in a NATO exercise in Denmark, we deployed intermediate nuclear forces, intermediate range missiles, nuclear capable, to Denmark. And Putin said, okay, we're moving forward. And the byproduct of this is the missile that was tested the other day. But people don't understand what this missile is. This missile is the modern day version of the Skorost. You see, the Russians are building a missile that can be pushed forward and be ready to preempt Dark Eagle, our intermediate missile. The Russians just put the Mark 41 Aegis Ashore on notice in Poland. That is a target. The target that will destroy it is this. Look at what this was. This is a missile that makes use of not the Yars which is what the Rubiège, the RS-26, this is derived from, used the Yars first stage. This uses the Keder first stage, the cedar. Now, most people don't know what the cedar is, but the Ukrainians just came out and said that it's the cedar. How would they know? Well, they have the debris. And on the debris are serial numbers, and the serial numbers show what the booster was. This is the most modern booster that the Russians have. Similar in size to the ours, so as it doesn't change the configuration of the system, but it has unique solid fuel principles that allow the missile to burn in variable speeds, making it impossible to target. The other thing it does is it doesn't use traditional MIRVs. I keep hearing people say multiple, independently targeted warheads. That's not what this was, not at all. This is the new system. The new system is, instead of a bus, a plate, so to speak, where the warheads are attached, that separates from the missile and then comes in and releases the warheads to their target on a trajectory, though, because it's still moving as this happens. What we have now is independent mini missiles that are there, and they fire themselves. So the first stage takes it up, second stage puts it in, and then you fire these independent missiles. And these missiles, each one of them had 6 large submunitions on them. This is where the name hazelnut comes from. Because if you look at a hazelnut tree, you look at the pod of nuts, it's exactly what you see with these submunitions coming down. This missile was developed specifically to take out Dark Eagle missile arrays. If you take a look at the layout, the footprint of the Dark Eagle, where the radar is, where the command and communications are, where this missile is designed to annihilate that. People kept saying, where's the explosion? It's not meant to be high explosive. It's meant to be a kinetic kill. And these submunitions come down and they will kinetically kill everything on the ground. These submunitions come down at such velocity that if they hit the Aegis ashore, it will be a smoking hole in the ground. This is what this missile is designed. Putin just put us on notice that he has a conventional missile system that is designed to preempt anything and everything NATO plans on doing to Russia, and there is no NATO response. There's nothing they can do about it. This is literally the equivalent of the most alpha wolf in the world coming in and pissing all over your home. That's what Putin just did. And it didn't have to be this way. Putin said right there, your withdrawal from the INF Treaty was the greatest mistake you have ever made, because now you have compelled us to do this. And here we are. We didn't want to be here, but because of all the provocations you've done, we have checkmated you. And that's the case. I don't think the West has woken up to what has just happened. It is over for the West. The only thing we can do is nuclear war. And sadly, we have somebody who believes that we can have a nuclear exchange. I just, again, want to have people reflect on what that means. It means the Biden administration is ready to sacrifice 100 million Americans for Ukraine. The Biden administration is ready to sacrifice 100 million Americans for Ukraine. And is that what we want? So I want to thank Professor Starr for his presentation. It's fantastic. But guys, this is as real as it gets. This isn't theoretical. The reason why I went through all this, the stuff about this missile, is to point out that sometimes when people talk about weapon systems and all that, people feel a little remote from it. They don't identify with it because it's something they don't understand. So I wanted to bring it in a way that hopefully everybody understood what's going on, what this represents, how real this missile is, and what the consequences of our actions are in compelling Russia to develop this missile, and now the impossible situation it's put us in. Because understand, it has put us in an impossible situation, a very dangerous situation. By revealing this missile and showing his willingness to use this, Putin has literally given the West 2 options. capitulate, or nuclear war. We have to find a way to find a third option.